My name is John Passfield, and the title of this reading will be John and Dickens Video 4, Scrooge. Here's my novella, the cover. Okay, it's John and Dickens. I have to hold it close because the diagram doesn't come out easily. It's John on your right, meeting Dickens in his writing room, surrounded by his characters, and the novella goes on from there. Here's the summary on the back page, back cover. Writer John Passfield leaves his home, buys a coffee, drives down to the shores of Lake Erie to perform a Christmas ritual. Strolling along the beach at Port Maitland is something he's done for many years. But this year is different. This year, John suddenly finds himself in the writing room of famed Victorian novelist Charles Dickens, who sets out his new idea for a Christmas tale. Dickens invites John to watch rehearsals for the writing of the story. But as Dickens struggles through rehearsals for the writing of the story, John begins to wonder whether a Christmas carol will ever be written. So the characters are giving Dickens difficulties, let us say. John's not only surprised to find that the writer Charles Dickens is forced to negotiate with a character of his own creation for permission to include them in a story, John's also surprised to realize that the characters that he's known back in his own time, which is the future of Dickens and the Christmas Carol characters, are not quite the characters that they will become when Dickens commits them to ink and paper. Here's the rehearsal that Dickens invites John to attend as Dickens explains his ideas to the character Ebenezer Scrooge. So let's go to chapter 6, page 57. So this will be Dickens rehearsing the character that he has created, Ebenezer Scrooge, getting Ebenezer Scrooge, the character, ready for the day when Dickens will actually write his story. And John is privileged to get to watch, by invitation of Charles Dickens himself. "Look here, John, look here," Dickens is saying. "This is old Scrooge, who starts the story. He's the character who will be in every stave. 5 staves should allow me to do it. I always plan my tales. I'm going to explain to Scrooge how I want him to be. See him standing in his bedroom, in his nightgown and tasseled cap? He's mild-mannered, John, as he will be when the end of the tale is told, but I plan to make him a curmudgeon, stingy and selfish and bitter and cruel. It's for contrast, John, for contrast. I shall explain this to him today. Come on along with me, John, as I talk to him. I will give him an acting lesson, which he badly needs." Dickens plunges into the scene, and I find myself mysteriously drawn in too. Well, that's scene 1 of the rehearsal. Let's go to scene 2, page 60-61. Again, Dickens explaining to Scrooge what he will want Scrooge to do when he writes his story. "Oh, Scrooge is in his nightcap. I recognize the scene. He doesn't seem to notice me, as Dickens effusively explains. The scene is entirely silent for me. Luckily, Dickens is an excellent mime. I can see everything he wants old Scrooge to do and to be. Dickens dives beneath the covers. He makes himself small and frail and afraid, but abruptly he throws off the covers and leaps to the floor again. He seizes the old fellow's nightcap, pulls it down over his own head, and then he dives back into the bed again. Now Dickens lies there in his nightcap. Just his head is visible now. His eyes pop out in fear. He says a few words to the watching Scrooge, but I cannot hear a word that Dickens says. Dickens shivers in absolute horror. He croaks feebly to an imaginary ghost. Every word of response is a painful dart in his ear. Every once in a while he turns and explains the scene. Scrooge stands beside me and takes it all in. Just the two of us stand and watch Dickens emote. Just an ordinary old man, not the gruff Scrooge from the Christmas Story at all. It is Dickens who is Scrooge as I watch the scene. I feel the cold as Dickens mimes it. My teeth are chattering and my blood is like ice. I wonder if old Scrooge, the non-Dickens Scrooge, feels the same. Dickens throws off the covers and jumps back out and still in his shoes and snatches the nightcap from his head and tosses it down on the floor. Tosses it back to Scrooge again. Scrooge misses it and it falls down on the floor. Dickens puts his arm around Scrooge and points to the spot where he saw the ghost. He pops his eyes and points at Scrooge's eyes and leans in close to Scrooge's face and looks deep into his mind as if he were placing the other Scrooge, the Scrooge who will be Scrooge, under a spell. Scrooge is trying to look down at his nightcap. He is thinking of something else. He listens as if he's a schoolboy learning by rote. Well, that's scene 2 of the Dickens rehearsal. Dickens rehearsing Scrooge for the passage that he wants to write about and where Scrooge meets the ghost. Okay, here's scene 3 of Dickens rehearsing Scrooge. I can't believe that this is happening. This Scrooge is not the Scrooge of the Christmas Story. The person beside me is an entirely different man. I turn to talk to him, but he sits down on the bed and starts to cry. Dickens sits on the bed beside him. He puts his arm around Scrooge and he speaks what I take to be soothing words. Scrooge raises his tear-filled eyes and looks off in the distance. I wonder if the distance happens to be me. I'm directly in his line of sight, but I can't tell through his tears whether he even knows that I am in the room. The two of them, author and character, make a very disturbing sight. Scrooge wipes the tears from his cheeks. Dickens offers his handkerchief. Scrooge shakes his head and softly cries some more. I can't believe that this is happening. What a sentimental old man. I have no idea what has set him off in this way. Does Dickens want me to speak to him? He said he would want my help, that I was being created to soothe his characters, to intercede and ease a divide. I expect him to call upon me. This seems an appropriate time. I open my mouth to speak, but I find no words. It seems that I am a mime character too. Well, that's scene 3. Okay, here's scene 4 on the same page, page 65. It's John thinking about this. Scrooge, in person, is not very animated at all. Even his tears are gentle raindrops. I would have expected from him a raging typhoon. He's certainly not an actor, that's for sure. It's hard to tell whether Scrooge, the still unwritten Scrooge, understands what it is that Dickens will want him to do when he comes back to Scrooge's bedroom and writes the scene in which Scrooge is going to play his part. I wonder if Dickens is disappointed that Scrooge is not a very good actor. Does he see Scrooge as not quite adequate for the role? Can Dickens replace him? Is that an option? Or does he see something inside of Scrooge, an essence, an inner quality of which Scrooge, the actual Scrooge, is not aware? That will be evident to Scrooge when he and Dickens, holding hands at the edge of a cliff, make a leap and plunge down deeper than he has ever in his life as the Dickensless Scrooge descended before. So there's 4 scenes of the rehearsal. Dickens trying to explain to Scrooge what he'll want him to do and be when he writes Scrooge's story. In this reading, Charles Dickens has trouble convincing the character whom he has created, Ebenezer Scrooge, to cooperate in the writing of his proposed novella, A Christmas Carol. clear that Charles Dickens wants a novella to be written, but it's not clear at this point why the character Ebenezer Scrooge is reluctant to cooperate in the novella project. In a previous video, I mentioned that the great divides among humankind are not race, religion, sexuality, or gender, nor any other of the great social divides with which the media is so concerned in this year 2023, but rather with the divide that can be traced back through all human interaction through a number of shifting political alliances. I was born in 1945, so I've lived through a number of these shifting political alliances in my 78 years on this earth. If we look at the years 1939 to 1945, we might think that race was the great divide in human affairs at that time. After all, we're told that Hitler favored the Aryans and disfavored all who were not Aryan. In order to further his agenda, he formed the Axis to oppose the Allies. However, when we look at this a little more closely, we realize that the Axis forces were not all Aryan, as the Axis included Germany, Italy, and Japan. And of course, the Allied forces, were not all European. This was a world war and probably included almost every race on Earth, many of whom took part on the Allied side. So it's clear to me that race was not the central concern of the two forces that opposed each other during the Second World War. Well, perhaps one could say that it was ideology that led up to what became the Second World War. In the Germany of the 1920s, fascism battled communism for the minds of the German people. Fascism under Hitler won control of the government in 1933, and the country was purged of communists and of communist influence. And yet, when we look at 1938, the Hitler-Stalin Pact was an alliance between Hitler's fascist Germany and Stalin's communist Russia. So clearly it was not ideology that brought these two forces together, but a shared agenda. There was another shift in 1941 when Hitler invaded Russia. Neither side had changed its own ideology. So the explanation is that both Hitler and Stalin had their own separate agendas, but sought out new alliances to advance those agendas. Now, if we look at what followed World War II, we find shifting alliances again. The West and Russia had been allies against Hitler's Germany till 1945, but now in the post-war era, the West and Germany formed an alliance against what was now Soviet Russia. So it's clear to me that the great divides in human interaction are not race, ideology, or politics, but are actually agenda-based. We humans form alliances with others of a superficial difference in order to further our own agendas. We humans form these alliances in order to oppose the agendas that we feel will injure or destroy our own agendas. We ignore racial differences, we ignore ideological differences, we ignore political differences, and all other differences in pursuit of our own agendas. Serious literature deals with social issues, of course, race, gender, sexuality, religion, politics, ideology, and so on. But it is judged as serious literature at a much deeper level of social interaction, the level at which agendas, shared and not shared, shared and opposed, are the great human concern. So once again, this is my novel, John and Dickens, A Christmas Mystery, just holding it so you can see the diagram. A novella by John Passfield. It's found on Amazon, where there's more information. My publisher's website is rocksmillspress.com, ROCKSMILLSPRESS.com. More information there. My website has 2 free books, johnpassfield.ca, JOHNPASSFIELD.ca, a planning notebook and a journal. The planning notebook is simply that. The planning and writing of the novel is covered. The journal is reflective now that the novel is complete in rough draft. what do I think of all these topics that are dealt with in the novel. So have a look at those books if you're interested in that kind of thing. Lastly, I'll say thank you for watching this video.